Good morning, Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington, Friday, the 7th of August. Wow, the first week of August already gone. And that means summer is just about gone, and kids will be returning to, well, maybe whatever school looks like. Kids will be returning to some kind of learning. We still aren't sure here in Yakima County, Washington, but it looks like pretty much most of the schools in this area are going to be doing online learning. That we can't even do mixed learning because the risk of children getting infected in school and bringing that infection home to parents, grandparents, people who cannot or will not social distance and continuing to spread COVID-19. That's the reality we're living with. Meanwhile, the heat wave broke. Wednesday was hot. I was trying to do some yard work out there in the evening in the shade of our trees, and it was still 95 degrees in the shade, too hot. Yesterday was much nicer. Today, supposed to be perhaps no hotter than 85. I'm looking forward to being outside a little bit more later in the afternoon today. Maybe I'll go out and do some pottery out on my patio after this. It's time I got back and played with some clay. Well, one of the stickiest chapters, one of the most contentious chapters in the entire Bible, as well as in the book of Genesis, is chapter 19. And it brings up the question of sexuality and the meaning of sexuality and the ways in which this has rippled down 4 millennia to our time. The 2 men are now called angels that were traveling with Abraham and the Lord. Abraham has gone home. The Lord has then joined the 2 men, presumably. So 19 verse 1, the 2 men came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. He made them a feast, baked them unleavened bread, and they ate. Okay, that sounds a lot like when the men came to Abraham. He says, "Please, do not hasten on your way, but let me show you hospitality." He recognizes this as a divine presence. Lot the same way. And Lot says, "Come to my house." "No, we'll stay in the square." "No, please, I want to show you hospitality. I have a need as part of the covenant extended to God, to Abraham, and to all of Abraham's descendants. Even though Lot is one of Abraham's brother's sons, nonetheless, he has an understanding. He was part of that understanding that God is their God. So these 2 angels agree. They will lodge with Lot. Now keep in mind, just in the last chapter, Abraham says, if there's only 10 righteous in the city, and God says, if there's only 10 righteous in Sodom, I will consider the whole place righteous and I won't destroy them. Well, how big is Lot and his family? Well, apparently not big enough to meet that standard of 10. And they only counted men, not women and children, as we found out in the feeding of the 5,000. 5,000 men were fed by Jesus and the disciples with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. 5,000 men. Oh, and there were women and children there too. It was kind of, Matthew adds that as an aside, which is fairly typical of the entire biblical narrative. It's a patriarchal story in which when women do appear, pay attention to them, because that says they had an outstanding story to tell, which is why the book of Ruth is so incredibly amazing. But then again, she's only there because of King David, her great-grandson. All right, verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, and all the people to the last man surrounded the house. They called out to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." And the word know means have sexual relations with them. Lot went out to the door to the men and shut the door after him and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you and do as you please. Only do nothing to these men. They have come under the shelter of my roof. So here, this is incredibly disturbing for any number of reasons. This is just wrong. Here are these men saying, we want these visitors. And it's so easy to get into camps of thinking, and part of the reason that this has become such a divisive text is that Christians are divided on what is homosexuality. And there are those who use this passage as Christians to say God hates homosexuals and homosexuality, homosexual activity. And as Christians, we really need to be careful using the Old Testament to create New Testament standards. Secondly, our New Testament standard is John 3:16 and 3:17 and Romans 3, where God so loved the whole world that he forgave the world through the death of Jesus Christ, and all of us are sinners who have no right to call another person sinful or what they're doing as more sinful than us, more in need of redemption or less in need of redemption than us. Second of all, the homosexual community would say that isn't just about homosexuality. There's much more to that text that you need to unpack. These men are saying, we want to take these strangers by force. Well, that's rape, regardless of whether it's homosexuality. It's still power and rape. What was going on back then? What was God really, really disturbed at that he's going to wipe out an entire city? The competing religions of the day often had various kind of sexualized rituals at the heart of them. And it was all about worshiping pagan gods. And no doubt this was the case in Sodom. So here are people saying, we need to do this. We need to forcibly take strangers, visitors. And then some will say, then there's the rule of hospitality. Lot has taken these people into his home. They are his guests, and he is responsible for their lodging, their well-being, their feeding, and their safety. So he would be answerable to God if he surrenders these men. Here's what's disturbing. He says, take my virgin daughters instead. He recognized these are divine angels. Did he have a moral deliberation going, what am I going to do? I've got daughters, I've got angels. Daughters, after all, they're just property. And that, again, by our standards today, would be so wrong. Go ahead, rape my daughters, but don't rape these men, because that makes it okay, right? No, it doesn't. Unfortunately, sexuality, because of the way the church has developed, somehow sexuality has become linked with sin, and we forget sin as so much greater than that. If you look at the Catholic Church, so much of how they define holiness and sin, the priests are male. They have the same plumbing as Jesus. The priests are celibate. Like Jesus, they have no relations. And what happens in a system like that then? Well, then women become second class. Abortion, birth control, divorce, all these things that have to do with sexual relations become blown out of proportion. Economic sin, injustice, slavery, and other things. And remember the fact that the Catholic and Lutheran churches in Germany took a blind eye toward Hitler and the extermination of 6 million Jews. That somehow was acceptable. But God forbid a woman should use birth control and lure her husband into wasting his seed. Sexuality is such a confused thing, and the church has had problems having honest conversations about it, and this text is right at the center of that, because everything about this is offensive. The fact that he would offer his daughters ought to enrage men and women. Well, what happens in this, these 2 angels open the door, they pull pull Lot back inside. They blind the men. And verse 12, the men said to Lot, anyone else here? Sons-in-law, daughters, sons, anyone else you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. The Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were about to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Well, why would his sons-in-law not take him seriously? After all, he has just said, by the way, I'm about to send your future daughter, or your future wives, my daughters, out to be raped by these men. I hope that's okay with you, as long as these angels are okay. As I say, there's nothing about this story that I like. But it's in the Bible. We can't avoid it. We have to hit it head on and realize it is what it is, a story that's disturbing. And we need stories that are disturbing because they force us to realize that we live in a very complex world and that there are so many ways. As the Jewish rabbis would say, if you're not finding 70 different ways to look at a story, you're not trying hard enough.